So I think one of the most important yet simplest form of information transfer is via human conversations. However, the study of conversations is made more difficult by the fact that it is challenging to collect large amounts of human conversation. For today, I will talk about our analysis on 3 novel sources of human conversations. Let me begin by defining what an utterance is. So an utterance is the speech in each turn of a conversation, and in the example, each person has 2 utterances. So what we want to know is how utterance lengths in particular change with medium, time, and location. So to answer that question, we looked at fictional conversations from books and movies, and conversations from Twitter. And if we plot the distribution of utterance lengths, we'll get the following. So as you can see, the plots are quite similar. They follow a negative binomial or a gamma distribution. So for Twitter, there's a second peak near 140 because Twitter has 140 characters. So users are trying to compress their messages so that it will fit the message length. But if you compare that with the other plots, as you will see that if you estimate that only about less than 5% will be affected by the 140 character limit. Now, as you can see again, the distributions are not symmetric, so it's asymmetric. So we compared the lengths by looking at aside from looking at the distributions, we summarize the locations by using the median, and we will get the following median utterance lengths. So the shortest utterances are from movies, and the longest are from books. But if we split the conversations from books into sentences, we will get that the sentence length in this case is actually closer to Twitter than from books or movies. Now, this implies that conversations adapt to the medium, and in some ways it's not that unexpected. What is quite surprising, at least for us, was that if we look at the utterance lengths over time, utterances are in fact getting shorter. So for books and movies, this is on a scale of several centuries, several years. But if we look at the change in utterance lengths over Twitter, over a scale of 3 years, we in fact found that utterances are getting shorter at a much faster scale. So at a scale of, after 3 years, within 3 years, tweets are in fact getting shortened by about 15 characters. Considering that there's a 140 character limit, this is significant. Now, we have the data, so we're curious. What if we look at the utterance lengths over different locations? So we tried that with the US, and we found the following. Well, depending on how you see it, you can't really define, you can't really say, for example, that the eastern part is mostly shorter utterances and so on. So what we did was to correlate this with socio-economic, demographic data, and found only a single variable that has possible correlation, and that is in the percent black population. However, I'm not aware of any stereotypes with regard to region with regard to length according to region. However, in the UK, there's this stereotype that people living up north talk longer than southerners because they say they are more friendly. Now, we're curious if we can see any traces of that stereotype in our data set. So we did that. We considered different versions of what north means. So we looked at northern UK, northern Great Britain, northern England, and for different regions of England. We found that there's no evidence that supports the stereotype that northerners talk longer than southerners. So we tried doing some simple clustering based on their distributions, utterance distributions, and we found that there's really no such evidence. And we also tried grouping tweets by latitude and binning them. And again, there's no evidence supporting that stereotype. Now, there's a similar stereotype for Italy, but for Italy, people say that Southerners talk longer than Northerners. We looked at that and found that there's no evidence still. So I admit that perhaps our metric is not correct or it's really not sampled correctly at all. But what we did is the typical big data approach to knowledge discovery. We have a data, we try to find something interesting with it. And I admit that we need to properly verify it because it's obviously it's obviously biased. And so far, we've only looked at observations. We haven't modeled them, so it's interesting to model how and why these things that we observe are such. So, Susie mentioned, I'm currently working with Stephen Bishop and Daniele and we're from UCL, and Susie and Tobias are from WBS. Most of that talk, however, were based on my PhD work with Mei Lim from the University of the Philippines. And, well, I have a lot of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. That was excellent. Any questions?
Have you somehow considered the possibility that someone's, writes small number of letters, but is actually willing to be in the conversation for a longer time? Whether you make difference that someone may be, longer time in the conversation, yet still speaking shortly, let's say, or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
this might be different, right?
We've already thought about that, but the problem is our data is actually sampled over time instead of users, so it's a bit difficult to collect the date tweets per use. But again, that is possible.
Do you think it'll be possible to conduct an experiment wherein you gave a topic of conversation to few subjects and then you asked them to actually chat over computer and then talk the same in person and then see how it varied? Like, it kind of relates to the question that the other person asked. Like, people might talk for a longer time and then might actually write in shorter sentences.
That is a very good suggestion. We haven't thought of that. That's a very good suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you take into account abbreviation? So, I mean, people might be having a very long conversation, but they're just shortening it by abbreviating what they're saying?
That's actually one of the possible sources that possible causes that we try to conclude. And based on our follow-up, it's not yet finished, it's possible that is the reason. Although we still have to fully strengthen our conclusions or evidence. Yeah, but that is possible.
Oh, I just wondering also, can you tell about the trends in conversations? Like, is it going from informational more to informal kind of chit-chat?
It seems it's going to more informal if you base on the results.
I'm just curious. I don't know if you've done any comparison with data from the mass observation work that was done in the 1930s. So between 1937, because you might not know this, because you're probably too young for that, between 1937 and the 1960s, there was some huge anthropological studies conducted in the UK called mass observation. Huge, enormous studies. Absolutely fascinating to compare that data with what you're finding. Because you might get some longitudinal stuff in there. Time series stuff would be really interesting to see.
Thank you for that information. I'm not aware of that because, first of all, I'm not from UK. So yeah, I'll check that.
Well, sorry, I've got an similar type question. What about the medium and the impact of the book, the media, the Twitter as a technology? Have you considered that as part of the utterance, or how does that, like McLuhan's work on the medium is the message, those types?
So it seems that people adapt to the medium, on the capabilities of the medium, rather than people not adapting some medium because it cannot support their conversation. So instead of the media adapting conversations, it's the other way around, it seems. People adapt to the medium.